there. I know. It's been, I don't even know, I think it's been over a year at this point since I've done anything on this channel. The thing is, I started it during the summer and I started it when I wasn't as busy. But since then, I've picked up 3 jobs. One as a speech and debate coach, one as a policy intern, and one working at a restaurant. And I'm taking college classes for political science, and I'm also still competing in speech and debate at the time as well. So I've been doing a lot of things, and I haven't really prioritized uploading or putting out any content, and kind of just settled into a rhythm of doing that. But the events of the last couple of weeks really started me thinking again, plus a couple of speakers at the Texas Youth Summit conference that I went to last week. In this time especially, we all have a voice and we all have ideas. And if we speak the truth, it's important to use whatever platform we have to be able to promulgate that and be able to tell it to others who live throughout the world. Charlie Kirk was a role model to me in that area and in so many others, and after what happened to him a couple of weeks ago, I want more than ever to use any platform I have, any amount of subscribers, anyone who wants to even listen to what I have to say. I want to use that platform, speak the truth, and do it freely. So, I'm going to keep contributing to the marketplace of ideas, mainly in the areas of politics and culture, as you probably know if you watched this channel before, and I'm going to keep encouraging others to do the same. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about a new policy that was passed a couple of weeks ago, also known as the Texas App Store Accountability Act. Now, let's talk first about, an overview of this bill, and then we'll be attempting to answer the question whether or not this is a good or a bad thing for consumers. Keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and look at what this bill is. According to the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Senate Bill 2420 by Senator Angela Paxton and House Bill 4901 by Representative Caroline Fairley extend the framework established by previous state-level laws and proven safeguards aimed at protecting children from harmful digital products, end quote. So, why exactly is this something that's even being debated in the first place? Well, right now, Apple, the App Store, and all of these different developers kind of self-report the ratings for their apps. So you have kids getting on apps that are meant for people who are my age and over, and you have people who are my age and over getting on platforms that are mostly made for kids with, let's just say, ill intent in mind. So right now, this is all completely unregulated. It's an entire space with very little regulation around it. So let's take a look at why it's needed. The average screen time in the US, particularly among people who are my age and younger, which is kind of concerning, is around 7 to 8 hours per day. I would encourage you to look at what yours is after you finish watching this video, but anyways, I digress. 56% of 13 to 17-year-olds had Mind Health Quotient or MHQ scores in the distressed or struggling range compared with 20% for their adult counterparts, again according to Texas Public Policy Foundation. In addition to that, 51% of American children report being detached from reality, with more than half acknowledging that constant feelings of sadness, guilt, fear, and anxiety cause serious problems in everyday life. The report also goes on to add that this is all a recent development, as in within the last 25 to 30 years. Now, what does this say? It could absolutely just be a coincidence, right? I mean, maybe there was something else that has caused us to be so much more introspective, to look at ourselves, both in our appearance and the way that our personality is, and comparing that to others. Maybe there's something else that did that besides the rise of social media. But it's highly unlikely. So when we look at the data, it's very, very clear. Putting kids on these kind of apps from a very young age, especially for 7 to 8 hours a day, hasn't exactly given us any advantages as a society. In fact, it's probably done a pretty significant amount of irreversible damage. So let's talk about how this bill works. The App Store accountability would, according to Texas Public Policy Foundation once again, quote, require robust age verification when creating an account with an app store using a commercially reasonable method. App stores would categorize users as child, younger than 13, younger teenager, 13 to 16, older teenager, 16 to 18, and adults, 18 and over. End quote. Well, like I said earlier, a lot of these apps already have quote-unquote age ratings. But the thing is, they rate themselves. There are a lot of platforms, like for example, the last time I went on the App Store, TikTok was rated for 12 and up. I don't have any 12-year-olds. I'm not even old enough to have any 12-year-olds, but here's the thing. Out of the 12-year-olds that I know, I would not want any of these kids to be on TikTok. I wouldn't want any of these kids to be on Instagram. In fact, and a friend of mine and I have had a lot of discussions about this, we wish that kids that age would just go play outside, go in the woods, get dirty. I used to play Lord of the Rings, Avengers, pretty much everything in the woods behind my house with my brothers all the time. And I think it's a lot better that I did that instead of spending my childhood looking at a screen. But without this regulation, without any way of monitoring what exactly is going on, that's what's happening to a lot of kids in this generation. And again, we're seeing a lot of disadvantages to them psychologically. In addition to that, the Policy Foundation states that, quote, it would mandate parental oversight by requiring minor accounts to be affiliated with that of a parent or guardian, empowering parents to provide consent for app downloads or in-app purchases, end quote. There's a lot of platforms that already do this. For example, on Xbox, you can set that kind of a parental control. I think on Apple, you can set it, but it's optional, and a lot of people don't know about it. So you end up with kids who grow up on these kind of platforms, and then when they get to my age, it's a little bit too late to backtrack. But what this legislation does is makes it mandatory for parents to actually go in, look at this, and make sure that they are intentional about what exactly their children are looking at and participating in while they're using these devices. Instead of making it an optional thing that not a lot of people know about and is very hard to set up, it's going to be mandatory, and it's going to be made a lot more simple by the passage of this legislation. Next, it also establishes strong data privacy standards, including data minimization, deletion of personal data used to verify age, and enhanced security for any personal information transmitted. Last but not least, it creates accountability by making failures to meet these requirements a deceptive trade practice, enforceable by the Texas Attorney General. The main gist of all of that is the App Store is not going to be able to collect as much information or distribute as much information about you, especially if you're a minor, and we're going to make this an actual state law so that if companies, try to find a way to skate around this or whatever, the Texas Attorney General and others can prosecute them and pursue justice. So that's essentially what this bill does. But keep in mind, earlier I posed the question, will this App Store Accountability Act be good or bad for Apple's consumers ultimately? There's two sides, and I think that both sides are warranted, so let's look at both of the concerns, right? So, on the negative side, if you will, some have expressed concerns about privacy and information security on the App Store with this policy. The reason that these concerns have come up is, well, if they're going to provide more age verification and you're going to have these extra security measures, they have to know more about you, right? Well, not quite. You see, the App Store already collects data about you, your age, your birthday, etc. You use all of that in order to make your Apple account, and you agree to that in the terms of service that Apple gives you anyways. So, while these privacy concerns are warranted, of course, anytime big tech tries to do something or we try to make any kinds of legislation having to do with technology policy, it's understandable, and it's a good thing that we have a little bit, if not a lot, of scrutiny as it relates to it. But this is a concern that ultimately I don't see holding a whole lot of weight just because of the fact that, again, they already have your age, and this isn't going to make anything else apparent to them. In fact, like I said earlier, this legislation is actually going to minimize that and downsize it even more. So with the concern out of the way, let's go ahead and look at a couple more key advantages to this policy, shall we? The advantages are that this will help combat high screen time by giving access to less of these apps to kids and to young people. A lot of my friends who I have talked to that have higher screen time say that it's because certain apps are on their phones. When they delete these apps, they've noticed a significant reduction in the amount of time that they spend on these screens. Now, keep in mind, my friends are still somewhat regulated on this, as am I. But a lot of these kids who are using these platforms from a very, very young age and are growing up dependent on this for validation, for dopamine hits, for who knows what else, they're vastly unregulated by their parents and, of course, obviously by these companies in the first place. So, this act is going to provide a lot more accountability, and it's going to reduce this by ultimately making it to be more intentional with the way that you use your screen time, and making your parents or guardians more aware of how you're using it so that they can step in if something becomes harmful. The next advantage is, well, this isn't something that we can prove yet, obviously, but this is just something that, in my own analysis and my own contemplation of this bill, I kind of hope will happen. Hopefully, this is going to teach kids that technology is a tool and not a distraction. I myself used to have a lot of trouble with being on my phone, being on my computer, doing various things on screens for a lot longer in the day than I actually wanted to. And then I would look at what my screen time added up to at the end of the day, and I would just feel terrible about it. Because here's the thing. Ultimately, you're wasting time. Like I said earlier, the average screen time for Americans is between 7 and 8 hours at this point, Most of us sleep about 8 hours a night. That's the general recommendation, so let's say that's what most of the population gets. If you do, and you fall into that average that spends 7 to 8 hours looking at your phone in a day, you are spending half of the time you are awake, not interacting with the real world, not interacting with the people who are around you, not experiencing what's actually set out for you to experience in the day. But you're spending it like this. And a lot of kids grow up thinking that that's normal, because the way that they use technology, the apps that they're allowed to have, and the usage of them contributes to a broader mindset that technology is now a distraction and not necessarily a tool to be used for anything. You can shake that mindset. I've done it. I know a lot of people who have done it, and ultimately you'll be a lot better off for it. But it's very hard to, especially if it's something that you just grow up with and it's ingrained in you. I think that this legislation will ultimately have a positive effect on this, because if you have to be more intentional with what you're putting on your phone, how you're using it, and how much time you're on it, it's going to teach the lesson that your technology should be more of a tool than a distraction. Can you use it for fun things sometimes? Yes, of course. But that shouldn't be the primary purpose of it, and it shouldn't be the majority of the consumption of the time that we have on these screens in the first place. So in the end, I believe that the Texas App Store Accountability Act, while there have been some concerns raised about privacy, I believe that these concerns are vastly invalid, and I believe that this ultimately is going to be a policy change for the better. When I was at the Texas Youth Summit last weekend, Governor Abbott, who personally oversaw the passage and the writing of this bill, called it, quote, constitutional and common sense, end quote. Let's hope that this bill leads the way so that we see a more positive trend in our legislation and a negative trend in children's screen times.